Shawn, how you doing? Hey, what's the next big competition you're training for?
Off.
You're off right now?
All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple interesting stories for you guys today. The first story, as you guys saw me roll in that intro there, is Shawn Rhoden made it on TMZ. Now, TMZ was one of the first websites to really report on the initial Shawn Rhoden situation earlier this year. It was on their website where most of the updates and stuff were being leaked. And a lot of the information and specifics about the allegation and a lot of the details first came out through TMZ. So TMZ had this interview with Shawn on TMZ Sports, which is kind of interesting to see because typically TMZ, these TMZ reporters and camera guys are running up on celebrities like the Justin Biebers and the Miley Cyruses. So it's kind of interesting to see Shawn Rhoden on TMZ and being approached by a reporter like this that's kind of outside of the bodybuilding realm. I mean, we've seen Shawn be interviewed and approached by guys within bodybuilding, but to see him on TMZ Sports was interesting. Now, the gist of this interview was essentially hinting at the case against Shawn, but never directly really asking him a question about the case. The main thing that I got from this interview was the interviewer asked Shawn, is he confident that he's going to compete in the Mr. Olympia next year, the 2020 Mr. Olympia. And Shawn jokingly says he might just retire. But then right after he says that, Shawn says, no, he'll be back to competing in no time. And then the reporter asks him about Brandon Curry. He asked his opinion on Brandon. He said Brandon's a great guy or something to that effect. And congratulations to him. So I did like the fact that at least the TMZ reporter was a little bit familiar with bodybuilding and the fact that Brandon just won the Olympia. So it wasn't just some guy, chasing down Shawn for a scoop on the case. He at least had some information about bodybuilding. And you could tell, really during the duration of this interview, the reporter really wanted to ask about the case, but never really directly did. The final question that he asks is, are you confident in your legal team? And Shawn says, yeah, of course, and gives him a thumbs up. So no really groundbreaking questions were asked, but I think just the simple fact that Shawn was featured on TMZ and TMZ went out of their way to kind of chase him down was interesting. And I thought the fact that they were covering Shawn's case so closely in the beginning was also interesting because TMZ, they rarely ever cover bodybuilding stories in their TMZ Sports section. I mean, in TMZ Sports, they cover positive and negative stories all the time on other sports. But with bodybuilding, typically when you see TMZ pick up a bodybuilding story, it's almost always a negative story. They picked up the Rich Piana story when Rich passed away. I believe they picked up the Dallas McCarver story when Dallas passed away. Now they picked up these allegations against Shawn. So they rarely ever pick up anything positive about bodybuilding. So it's interesting to me that the one time they go out of their way to interview a bodybuilder, with a run-up cameraman, it's kind of in regards to these allegations, and it's a negative story. But at least the interviewer was somewhat nice and respectful and wasn't asking too prying of questions. But it was interesting to see Shawn on TMZ Sports. Personally, I don't think we're going to see Shawn come back to the Olympia. Now, the reason I say this, I think the Olympia kind of did him wrong. My opinion is it was a tough decision for the Olympia people to make. No matter what they did, whether they let him compete or not, it would have been a lose-lose for them. It would have been hard to say he could compete because a lot of people would be mad if they let him compete. Because of the pending allegations, a lot of people were going to be mad and were mad at the fact that they didn't let him compete because of the pending allegations. So there really was not a right move for the Olympia to make in regards to Shawn Rhoden. But I think the fact that they prevented him from competing this year means that even if Shawn is exonerated before the 2020 Olympia, and even if they invited him to compete, if I were Shawn, I probably wouldn't even want to go there and compete because I would think, A, they didn't let me compete last year, so there would be some bad blood there. And B, even if he's found innocent, if he's found not guilty, and they let Shawn compete in the Olympia or they invite him to compete in the Olympia, there's still the fact that Shawn could be thinking in the back of his mind, there's politics working against me here, even though I was found innocent or whatever happens with the case. This stigma is always going to be hanging above my head. And will this stigma prevent them from letting me win again? Because there was this whole controversy last year. It might not reflect good on them. So politically, they might not want him to win the title. Politics and bodybuilding are a very real thing. And who knows to what extent that could influence the judge's decision or influence the Olympia decision to actually letting Shawn win the title, even if they let him compete again. So it's tough to say. Now, they did ask Shawn in this interview what his next competition would be. And Shawn doesn't really answer that question, but we pretty much know at this point that Shawn's next competition that he's planning on competing in is the 2020 Arnold Classic in Columbus, Ohio, a title that Shawn has never won, a title that Shawn has said he's always wanted to win. And one of the first shows that got Shawn interested in bodybuilding was the Arnold Classic. So even if we don't see Shawn at the Olympia in 2020, which I don't think we will, I think we will see Shawn at the 2020 Arnold Classic. And I don't think there's going to be any really major developments in this case before the 2020 Arnold Classic. But again, I do wish Shawn the best. I hope these allegations turn out to be false allegations, and I do hope that Shawn is exonerated. In best case scenario, I think, is if Shawn didn't do this. Now, the next story that I have for you guys today is Brandon Curry's response to Dorian Yates. So Dorian Yates did an interview a couple days ago with the Valuetainment YouTube channel, where the interviewer asks Dorian his opinion on the 2019 Mr. Olympia lineup, and specifically questions about the 2019 Mr. Olympia champ, Brandon Curry. Now, Dorian Yates, he says he respects everybody on stage, but his answer isn't a very flattering answer towards Brandon Curry. And we talked about this in the last news video. He essentially criticizes Brandon's conditioning, compares Brandon to himself, and says, as Dorian Yates himself at 6 weeks out, that's about the conditioning that he would have at 6 weeks out, that Dorian would have at 6 weeks out, is the conditioning that Brandon brought on stage at the Olympia. So a pretty critical opinion from Dorian Yates on Brandon Curry. Now, Dorian also says that he doesn't believe that Brandon would place top 6 in the Mr. Olympias of the 90s that Dorian competed in. And he also goes on to say in that interview that he believes Heidi Chupin and William Bonac had superior condition to Brandon Curry, but they picked Brandon because he had the most stage presence and looked the most like a Mr. Olympia as far as kind of a standout physique and the roundness in his muscle belly. So he does complement the roundness and fullness that Brandon brings. So according to the sports media website fitnessvolt.com, after this interview with Dorian Yates, they reached out to Brandon Curry for a statement regarding that interview. And this is what they claim Brandon Curry had to say. He says, "What can I say to all of that? First off, Dorian simply answered the questions that he was asked by the interviewer, and he gave his opinions. I can't be mad at Dorian for that. Let him have what he accomplished in his day, and if my win is able to bring him relevance in present day through a comparison of himself to me, then so be it. Opinions are just opinions. Some are constructive criticism and some are just unproductive. It is what it is. Personally, I could never imagine comparing myself and what I am able to accomplish now to whomever is crowned 20 years from now. My time is now. I live in the present. All that matters at the end of the day is that I secured my win. I've got work to do and I'm staying focused on it. My feelings don't get butthurt about all this stuff. Not sure what/why everyone is saying too much, but hey, I guess I must have been doing something right." So this is why I like Brandon Curry. I think he's a very good ambassador as Mr. Olympia. He serves as a very diplomatic guy. This response was a very diplomatic response to what Dorian Yates said. Because to be fair, whether Dorian was right or wrong, he did take some pretty big shots at Brandon's win in 2019. Saying that Brandon would not crack the top 6 at the Olympia in the 90s is a pretty big shot at Brandon Curry. He's the Mr. Olympia champ. And I do understand that a lot of bodybuilders and bodybuilding enthusiasts like to romanticize the idea that the 90s era of bodybuilding was really the golden era of bodybuilding in terms of conditioning and size. It was like the beginning of the mass monster era, but it wasn't too deep into the mass monster era because these guys still had crazy conditioning. And the 90s was a very good era of bodybuilding, but this interview definitely seemed to be a shoot interview towards Brandon Curry. And I think Brandon's response was a very diplomatic one, like I said, but also kind of a barbed diplomatic response because at the same time, he says he would never do what Dorian did, essentially is what he's saying in this statement. And I think even taking kind of a minor shot at Dorian, saying that he brought Dorian some relevance because Dorian won 20 years ago, and Dorian mentioned Brandon, and that was like the big, honestly, that was like the biggest point of the interview that they did with Dorian, because they had multiple different little segments of this interview, and the one where Dorian is talking about Brandon is the segment that got the most views on their channel. And Dorian wasn't really the first guy to take a shot at Brandon Curry. I think that Kai Green certainly took a shot with that Twitter post that we talked about a while ago, where he posted a comparison shot of him and Brandon back in the day, I believe almost 9 years ago, of them on stage. It was a back shot. And in that back shot, Kai Green clearly is superior to Brandon Curry. And I thought it was weird that he would post a comparison shot of him and Brandon as a congratulatory post. And a lot of the commenters and people replying to that tweet seem to think so too. So Brandon has seemed to catch quite a bit of criticism after his Olympia win from both guys that have won the Olympia, competed in the Olympia, critics and analysts. Everyone has been criticizing Brandon's win. But personally, I think he was the best choice for that title. And I think he certainly deserved that win. And he's the best ambassador for the Mr. Olympia title that was competing this year. So that about wraps it up for the video today, guys. I also wanted to mention I will be making an announcement about the 2019 Mr. Golden Era competition on my channel. This will be the 3rd annual Mr. Golden Era. I recommend that if you guys want to compete, you start prepping now. I'm going to make a formal announcement video here in the next few days, but the deadline is going to be mid-November. So it should give you guys about 6 weeks to prepare for this competition. It's kind of an online bodybuilding competition if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about. But I will make an announcement about it formally sometime this week, but just start getting ready now. Also, I wanted to mention that I did purchase a Sandow trophy. So I'm going to show you guys the Sandow trophy here in this video, but I want you guys to guess which year this Sandow is from, whose Sandow it was, and how much this Sandow cost. Let me know in the comment section below the answers to those questions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not subscribed yet already. And as always, Nick Strength and Power, signing out.